talking about writing and how it can help your career and other people's careers and how it can help you as a person as well. Um, so without further ado, Major Burnham, sir, if you don't mind introducing yourself and um, sharing some knowledge bombs.
All right. Hey, thanks for the introduction. Some of you know me, some of you may not know me. My name's Maj Burnham. I'm a C5 pilot in the squadron, believe it or not. And right now I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the 60th Air Mobility Wing for Colonel Nelson. Cosmo asked me to talk on writing. I'm going to let you know up front, I'm not an expert writer. I'm just a dude who writes a lot. So take it or leave it. Okay, so I'll start at any time. If you have a question or a comment or something's unclear, feel free to interrupt me, and we'll try to get on the same page. So I'll start with the quote. This quote is from a man that we all love and respect. Writing is the highest level of thinking because it forces you to clearly articulate your logic, which then decreases the fog and friction in the field. And that's by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Pollock. I don't know if any of you have seen, it was a month ago or maybe 2 months ago, Colonel Pollock sent out an email to everybody called Pollock on Writing and Reading. And it was incredibly eloquent. So another preface is read his email because it's going to be a lot better than what I'm about to say. Cool. So moving into what I think. So these are just some basic concepts. I want to make sure this is not boring, but basic concepts on what I try to do when I write. And this is writing in emails. This is writing in papers. This is writing love letters. Because although I'm not an expert writer, I am a very unselfish lover and makes me an authority. Anyways, so the first thing is know your audience and grab them. And by that, I mean, is like when I'm writing for my boss, who's the wing commander, I don't approach it the same way as I do when I'm writing to, you know, a senior airman. It's just different. Different backgrounds, different subject matters. It's different. And I'm going to grab them in a different way. Like, I don't approach Colonel Nelson the same way I approach anybody else. And I think that's pretty straightforward. So again, know your audience. Number two is cage the discussion. And I learned this the hard way by barging into people's offices and just talking off the hip. And then they'd stop me and say, what the hell are you talking about? So good writers, good talkers, the first thing they do is grab your attention. And Colonel Pollock emphasizes that. And that's what I mean when I say cage the discussion. So point one is know your audience. Point two is cage the discussion. Point three is key points first. And you probably learned this in high school. I hated reading, so I always tried to figure out how I could get the meat from a book or a novel, right? And what do they tell you? They tell you to read the first paragraph, then read the first sentence in every subsequent paragraph, and then read the conclusion, right? And that feeds the idea of key points first. If you write in any format, if you talk in any format and you say what matters up front, technically they could walk away from the conversation and know what you got. That's why in the military, you guys have seen it before, we use bluff, bottom line up front. It's just an effective writing tool where you say what's important off the bat. So that's point three, key points first. Point four, there's only 5 of them, by the way. Point four is keep it simple. A lot of people try to sound smart with big words, and that's all well and good, but if your reader doesn't know what you're talking about and they have to stop and look up what you meant, your writing is less effective. So use simple words and use simple sentence construction. Some people, when they write, especially to superiors, create these long ass sentences with run-on phrases that are super ineffective. So short sentences, use punctuation. Punctuation in writing does what your body does in real life. It breaks up the sentence. It emphasizes certain points. It gives natural pauses that you'd have when you talk to a human being. So use punctuation, keep your sentences simple. And the fifth and final point from Burnham's guide to writing effectively is active voice. Nobody likes to hear active voice, but it's true. You've heard it in high school from your English teachers, like, hey, don't use passive voice, there's passive voice. And I'm not going to go into what the difference between active and passive voice is, but the moral of the story is active voice makes a language that sucks. That's my opinion. I think English is a bad language, knowing a few others. It takes a language that's hard to understand and makes it easier to understand. When you write in passive voice, there's a high likelihood that the reader or listener won't know what you're talking about, and they'll have to rethink about the sentence to understand it. So you can read more on that later, but that's the fifth and final point. So in summary, know your audience, cage the discussion, key points first, keep everything simple, and then use active voice. That's kind of my technique. I have some tools that I use that apply those techniques, and I'm gonna attach them to the Zoom meeting before we go. But one thing I learned from an exec in the 22nd, I think it was 2010. You might know him. His name was Captain Kevin Stanley. He got this technique from, at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Jackie Breeden, who is now the wing commander at McGuire, and it's called BLIND, B-L-I-N-D, like blind man. And it's simply, most of my communication happens via email. So it's just a way of applying those 5 techniques I just told you to an email. And I'll send that out in this Zoom meeting. And essentially what that is BL is blind, it stands for bluff, which I've already discussed, bottom line up front. Then the I in blind is intent. What am I trying to get across? And that feeds to the concept of say the key points first. And then in is next action, which means what I want you to do for me. What do I want you to send me? What do I want you to tell me? What do I want you to answer? And that's, again, in an effort to keep things simple. And then the D in blind stands for discussion. And this is where you can vomit up all the minutia and queep that comes along with Air Force stuff, tasks, references, things of that nature. And this blind format also supports the ESSS, which we use a lot, especially at the wing and group level, and then every level above it. It's essentially an ESSS, but in a less formal format. So I try to blind my emails, blind my conversations with the boss who doesn't have a lot of time. I try to blind everything I'm doing. So you will see this technique I stole from someone who stole it from another person. You'll see that in this meeting. Cool. And then I also have a few resources. The first and foremost being Colonel Pollock's paper. It's a short bullet format paper on writing effectively, where if you haven't read it, he compares writing to being a good boxer. And it's, like I said, it's super eloquent and it's awesome. And he kind of gives you a visual on how you should write, and it's spot on. So I'll send that out in this meeting as well. And then we all have the internet. It's always accessible. So I use a couple websites. I'll send those out. One's called Inglaterra. This is hosted by a English professor who specializes in tutoring ESL or English as a second language students. And I appreciate that technique because we grew up assuming we're good at English when in fact most of us aren't. So this lady, she approaches it from that perspective and has a lot of good thoughts. And then the UNC's writing lab, they've got some really good points. If you don't know what passive voice is, UNC's writing lab will tell you in plain English. And then one of the most important resources that's super underused that we have as writers in the Air Force is Microsoft Office. I can't tell you how many times I've read an email or somebody's paper, a bullet background paper, a publication, and I go, I don't know if this guy or gal used spell check. And there's more than spell check. Spell check is the number one, but there's also grammar check. There's a style check. And if you dig into any Microsoft Office menu on your computer, all of these things are available for you to enable, and nobody uses them. It blows my mind. But you do that, and you'll sound smarter than you are because it'll get rid of the things that they recommend you not use in English, if that makes sense. So I'll send all that stuff out. But otherwise, that's all I got. And I'm standing by questions or discussion topics.
Awesome. Thanks. Um, Anybody got any questions off the bat? You can raise your hand or just speak up if you want. Um,
Can you all see that, or is it an
yeah.
attachment?
No, we can see it.
I don't mean for you to read it now. I just want to provide it.
Nice.
Okay. So
I got a question. I got a question for the crew, I guess. Has anybody recently tried to start writing as like a form of meditation or reflection after hearing, Colonel Kramer's thing the other day, or even done it before?
I'm writing my own book, so I mean, I guess that's one thing. But yeah.
Nice. Do you feel like it helps you meditate or like clear your head or anything like that after you spend time writing?
I feel like it makes me use my brain more because I would have to use more words that I usually wouldn't use in normal conversation. But I mean, like he was saying, whenever you're writing, you don't want to overcomplicate your words as well. So I'll like make it to where it's a general audience that I'm talking to, but not make it too smart talk-ish, I guess.
Nice. Is there any techniques you have to overcome like writer's block or times you don't feel like writing that you really should?
So whenever I don't want to write, I'm still thinking about plot development and also what I should be doing whenever I get back to it, like how I'm going to progress the story that I'm trying to write, kind of split up in sections on what is going to be going on in each chapter with each character or whatever topic that I'm going over. So
Nice. Thanks. Um, got a couple comments from the crowd here. One from Reinbold. When you write emails to try to affect change, how much data and research should you include in the email? I guess this one's more for Major Burnham, unless uh, you got anything to add.
he got that one.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks
So
for sharing, man.
what I understand is Cole's asking how much supporting information do I include, and the answer is as much as what's needed. I try to. I'm a professional exec. Apparently, I don't love it, but I keep getting exec jobs, so I try to think like my boss in everything I do. So when I put myself in my boss's chair and I'm reading the email that I'm writing to him, I try to think of the questions he's going to ask, right? And that tells me what supporting information I put. Do I put an entire 200-page PDF attached to the email? No, probably not. Do I take an extract of an AFI with a specific paragraph reference? Yeah, that's what I do. I'm an exec. I can read 200 pages. He's not. I give him a paragraph telling him, sir, this is what you need to know. I don't necessarily copy paste the words into the email, but I provide a summary using all the principles I talked about, telling him what he needs to know. If he wants a little bit more as a 06, I add it as an attachment with an extracted piece of page from an AFI. So that's pretty much in general how much information I'll give him. If it's a slideshow from another 06, I'll give him that. Just again, trying to take things off his plate and make it as simple as possible. So yeah, I include whatever he needs to understand what I'm trying to say, or whatever he needs or she needs to make a decision. Did that get at your question, Cole?
Perfect. Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
So here's one for Major Burnham or any of the senior NCOs too. Like, do you guys have any examples where good or bad writing directly affected the outcome of your career or one of your subordinates' careers?
I'll say I don't know of any times it's affected anyone's career, but when I used to work in command post, this was tough, right? Because we were 24/7, and you have 18 and 19-year-old airmen who are writing. Command post does a lot of reporting, and by that I mean literally writing stuff for the O6 on base and sending it up to the generals at 18th Air Force, at AMC, and at Headquarters Air Force. They're writing documents intended for generals. It's 2:00 in the morning, and they're 18 years old. Sometimes, because of poor writing skills or poor usage of tools, they would write something and a general would read it and say, WTF. Like you make yourself look real dumb real quick if your writing's bad. So again, didn't kill anybody's career, but it doesn't feel good for anybody when the general is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't read these sentences. The grammar is poor. The spelling's way off. I need you guys to tell me what's going on again. So again, not killing careers, but it kind of pissed everybody off, including myself, and it makes you look real bad. That's all I got on that one.
Cole, you got anything to add?
I would just say, I think writing emails, people really devalue like the power of writing an eloquent email, writing an email with a lot of data in it, or people don't really understand how far that email can go up the chain. Obviously you have the EPR, OPR awards and decks, right? That directly impact people's career when you start talking about promotions and things like that. But keying in on what you want to be accomplished via email, like Major Burnham said earlier, if you write an email and your main focus is to just get that email off as fast as possible, right? Like, I just got to fire off this email and send it out. But to Major Burnham's point, if you don't sound very smart in the email, people will perceive you as not very smart, right? Whether that's right or wrong, right? That's all they have is that email. There's no tone in it. There's no nuance in it. It's just words on the paper. So a good technique, if you're going to fire off an important email, have somebody else look at it. Hey, boss, can you look at this email, right? They're going to see something and they're going to be like, what are you even trying to say right there, right? Because you understand it. You know what you're trying to get across. But like Major Burnham said, who's your audience? Who is the receiver of the message is very important on how you craft that, whatever you're writing.
Can I also add to this? So some of the best advice I got was that an email is like an extension of yourself. And so when you send an email, it could be people's first impression of you. And so even though you think that the subject matter is not important, if the email doesn't make sense or isn't written very well, then people are already going to be judging you and making an impression of you, even if you've never met them. So the best way to think is like this email kind of telling people who you are, even if
Sorry, Lily, we kind of lost the last part there. You said the email is kind of telling people who you are and what?
Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi is kind of on the rocks, but just that it's people's first impression of you, even if you've never met them, and the email is not important, that it's an extension of yourself.
Nice, thanks.
I'll piggyback on what Lily's real quick. I'll piggyback on what Lily's saying. Also, in writing, when you put something in an email or on paper or in a text message, and I'm sure all of you know what I'm talking about here, they lose your inflection, your intonation, they lose your body language, they lose all of the things that humans use every day when they communicate. All of that's gone. So you especially like me, if you have dry humor and you put dry humor in an email to an 06 and they don't get it, because you're not there with the body language or with the smirk, you know what I mean? You can piss some people off. You can sound incredibly inappropriate if you're not careful. And like Cole was saying, you can sound dumb. So you have to be careful in written communication too. And just realize at all times that what you say, it may be the same sentence, but what you say on paper is not the same as what you say in person. Again, just to piggyback on what they were saying.
So I'll just throw my 2 cents in real quick. I will say, again, it goes off of knowing your audience, right? If I'm firing off an email to General Miller, I'm probably not just going to type it up real quick and fire it off. Majority of the emails that are going above squadron level or above the group wing level, I will have somebody proofread my email, right? I will read it myself 1 or 2 additional times, and then I'll have somebody else read it for me, mainly the commander, to come in and make sure I'm getting the proper message across, as well as how the receiver is gonna receive the overall message. And then just another part that you talked about, have I ever seen things, writing affect somebody's career? 100%. You see it all the time in awards, military-wise, with awards, right? If the award's not written properly, somebody, I've seen it many times where somebody has won an award at the AMC level, where the person at the squadron that didn't win should have won, because the information that was written just wasn't properly documented in a way that really showcased what the member did. So it definitely does affect, right? And we've seen a loss of bullet writing or any type of writing in the military over the last few years, mainly ALS getting rid of bullet writing. So it's on us to make sure we're teaching properly and ensuring our members continue to write, because it is an extremely important.
So I got a question for Major Burnham, or really anybody. So one of the things from Colonel Pollock's how-tos was state the thesis at the beginning. How do you usually go about thinking of your thesis? How do you make it sound like it's more than just a 4 or 5 word argument, that you actually kind of add some thought to it? Like what does a thesis look like in your experience?
So often when we write, some of the ideas we're putting on paper aren't our own. You know, there's somebody else's thoughts, or it's a group of separate thoughts that we've compiled to make a thesis statement. So I think one of the most important things you can do in a thesis statement is reword, whether that's your hypothesis or your conclusion, or just reword it differently than how you read it in your own words. And then reiterate. You can't say it. You can say it too many times, but it's not inappropriate. If this is what you want people to walk away with, this is your thesis and you want people to walk away with it, to say it twice in different words, again, with an attempt to just drive that point home. Other than that, I guess I don't really have too many techniques for a thesis. My writing that I do just every day doesn't include a lot of thesis, like classical thesis statements. It includes a lot of bluffs. And the key part of bluff is give them a standalone sentence that a human can take away, 25 words or less. And they know everything. They know a lot of what they would have needed to know to walk away with your argument. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it's good. Thanks. I guess kind of a follow-up too is, so after you go through the thesis, and later on you start with arguments and counter-arguments, right? So you've already made your opinion known in the writing, and then now it's time to start addressing the the other party's opinion. How do you go about, adding those counter arguments in your paper?
First thing, what's tough about counter arguments, I think, my opinion, is that they're contrary to what you think, right? So human nature is you're arguing with me in a way I think you're wrong. So we've talked about it a lot recently with what's going on in the world, but you have to try to understand the experiences that led up to a certain person thinking the opposite of what you think, right? You got to put yourself in their shoes to understand their counter argument. And when you're writing a paper, you don't have the person who's thinking contrary. You don't have them to talk to, but you have whatever they've written. So again, the answer shortly is you need to understand the counter argument. And in writing, that means you have to read. You have to read their counter argument to understand how you're going to counterpunch. In Colonel Pollock's in his words, he treats it like a counterpunch from the boxer standpoint. So you got to understand how they're going to counter before you can punch effectively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's good. Thanks. Bennett has his hand up. What you got?
Yeah, I'm glad we got into arguments, right? Sure, any of you that have interacted with me have probably had a lively debate about something, but I come from a family with a couple lawyers in it, and the biggest thing when it comes to arguments is facts, right? So it's not about what you know in an argument, it's about what you can prove. So that's what I really like to think about, especially when people come to me with issues and we want to up-channel those to, say, the commander. He's not going to want to know, like, what I think or, just kind of like my experience, like what can we prove to back our argument that we can show, right? And then another thing with arguments is if you find yourself getting into like a debate, right? A debate is, if you did debate in high school like I did, debate is won by whoever has the better arguments, not who has the better facts, right? So if you find yourself in a debate and you're just giving opinions and subjective ideas, then you're probably already on the losing end, right? So if you're getting into an argument and counter arguments, you want to provide things like facts, things that you can prove, statistics, things that you can show somebody and say that this is why I think this, and this is where I think you're wrong or right, or where I think we can make a change and things like that. If you start getting subjective and interjecting your opinion, then really you're just battle wolves at that point, and you're probably gonna lose that fight, especially if it's with a superior. So that's kind of what I got there.
Nice, thanks, man. Stacey Terry mentioned that writing specifically on his EPR staved his career with his ARC 15. You mind sharing a little more, Stacey?
Yeah. So, hey guys. First off, I'm Stacey Terry. I don't know if I've met like maybe half you guys just from me being gone, but so early in my career, it was actually my very first EPR. I got an Article 15, which turned into a referral EPR, and anybody who came in before 2015, I think, they used to have this 1 through 5 rating system, and everyone got a 5. Well, with the referral EPR, and we talked about this, with writing like a boxer and being that active speaker or active writer, that confidence that you have while you're writing. My supervisor at the time, even after I got my referral EPR, he gave me a 5, which my leadership was like, hell no, absolutely not. But he was confident in my abilities as an airman, and he wanted to write that down. He wanted that to be like my EPR. And yes, I made a mistake. If you have to know, it was underage drinking and resisting arrest. But he wanted my EPR to show that what my mistake that I made outside of work should not reflect my capabilities at work. So long story, he wrote, I got dinged. I got a 3 when there were 5s, but that 4 or 5 months later, they had the DOS rollback. Well, the DOS rollback was up to the commander's discretion, the squadron commander discretion on who he would kick out, right? So with that, I had to prove to the commander that even though I had an Article 15, I was still worth keeping. Otherwise, I'd be in the Air Force a year before they were like, get rid of this kid. So with my EPR and my supervisor having to write a strong EPR with a 3, that showed that I was worth keeping. Well, again, continuing later with just that single EPR still, the next year I got an EPR, it was good. But there was another DOS rollback. Well, on PCS, my gaining commander had to make the decision at that point whether to keep me or to get rid of me. And again, he's never met me. All he has to go off of is 2 EPRs because I've only been in the Air Force 2 years at this point. So again, my supervisor, and this is empowering for any supervisors as well, you directly affect your airmen. So if you write well, you could potentially see airman that maybe made one mistake but is worth keeping, because that's exactly what happened to me. I ended up PCSing or going to Fairchild. At that point, my commander looked at my EPRs and decided that I was worth keeping instead of, getting rid of. And I look at that like my supervisor saved me. So now I take time to make sure that my airmen, I effectively write for my airmen, things like that, because you never know when that one piece of paper is going to save somebody else's career or hurt them. So.
Awesome. Thanks. I got a question for anybody. Has anybody ever written a white paper or a bullet background paper that resulted in some sort of positive change? And it's not meant to make it sound like they're useless pieces of paper and writing. I know a lot of times people use them for experiences or opinions on literally anything.
I've never written one, but I have got to read quite a few from Colonel Trumbull, and it just kind of backs up what everybody's saying about, what information does the person that you're sending this to, what do they want to know? How do you come across on paper? They're very data driven, and honestly, I mean, you have 2 types of to Bennett's point, there is subjective information that you have to take into account, right? Like not everything is statistical, right? Like statistics are easy to dial in, right? You can say, hey, 50% of the people like McDonald's and 30% like Wendy's or whatever, right? Like, but that's coming off of people's feelings, right? That's more qualitative and not quantitative information. So there's a little mix of both, I think, in bullet background papers. They're very persuasive if written well and done well. So, but I've never written one.
Hey, Major Burnham here. So I saw somebody in the chat asked about white papers and bullet background papers and their definition, right? So that the audience knows what we're talking about. I'm not going to try to define them, but what I will refer you to is what nobody wants to hear. That's the tongue and quill. So part of knowing your audience is knowing who you work for. We work in the Air Force. The Air Force has a writing guide, and that is called the tongue and quill. And nobody wants to read it, but that is the standard we're held to. So if you want to know more about white papers, ESSS, memorandums, the right way to abbreviate captain, how you should write a letter to a senator, all that stuff. When to use apostrophes, because nobody gets that. Like when to use all of that stuff's in the tongue and quill. And that is the Air Force's writing guide. So hit the PDF from the ePublishing website, Control F and type in white paper, Control F, type in bullet background paper, type in official memorandum, and you'll see what the Air Force thinks about these things.
Nice. I'm proud of us that we made it 35 minutes without the tongue quote coming up. So well done, guys. And I was just kind of curious. So I didn't really know the difference between white paper and blow up background paper. So I threw it into Google, and it actually came up with a pretty good link to Air University. And like probably the top like 5 links are all useful things. So although the Air Force is very like small on their internet presence, don't be afraid to just try out the old Google machine sometimes.
Well, I wrote a white paper just after I got the squadron, so a little over 2.5 years ago, on the C5 Loadmaster FTU issue. Obviously, we haven't all seen change come out of it, but there has been change in the works for the last 2 years. But it'll be another 6 years till we see a finalized change.
Cool. I don't really have much more. Does anybody else have any questions or topics that we should have covered?
I got one technique I like to use when I'm writing an email or something is just read it out loud. It's like the difference that it sounds when you write it and you're reading it through your head, and when you read it out loud, it's astounding. And the difference can be crazy. It really, it's helped me a lot.
Nice, thanks. Cool. Major Burnham, any senior NCOs got some closing words?
Hey, no, I appreciate you guys asking me to do this, and I'll do one more minor piggyback, and that's what Collins had just said. Getting other people to read your stuff, reading it out loud is super valuable. Make sure that the person who reads your stuff, if your intent is to make sure that it's understandable, make sure that the person who's reading your email doesn't know what you're talking about, right? When pilots talk to each other, there's some assumptions, and we already know the basic concepts. We may know the argument or the point that the person's trying to make. Get somebody who's out of the Air Force. Get someone who's in a different crew position. Get someone of a different rank, someone outside of your bubble who maybe doesn't know what you're already trying to say, to proofread your stuff. That way you'll ensure it's understandable for everyone. And that's all I got. Otherwise, thank you for the opportunity.
That's awesome. Thanks. Yeah, we appreciate all your wisdom and feedback. And I just like to close with one quick quote from Kevin Malone. Why waste time, say a lot word, when a few words do trick? If anybody's an Office fan, you get it. But if not, enjoy your lunch. See ya.